you'll have kind of an AI agent, I guess like a Claude co-work or whatever it might be, and you will dictate exactly what you want. I need this kind of revenue management, I need this system, I need this cleaning automation, da-di-da-di-da. And in the same way that now, like I'm not a very techie person at all, but I can use a platform to develop an app is something I did a few months ago. And it's me just prompting it and telling it what I need. I think the exciting thing for a lot of property managers is having some kind of agentic AI where they can prompt exactly what they need from their property management system, exactly what they need from revenue management, rather than having to employ a revenue management specialist to do all this for you. Can you have a conversation and basically get it done yourself?
Welcome to the Property Funder podcast. I'm your host, Michael Dean. You can find me on the internet at property_funder. I'm here today with James Varley, who is the founder and CEO of Host Planet. James, welcome. Thanks for coming in. Hope you had a good journey in today.
Yeah, it was fine, thank you. Yeah, a couple of hours down from Selby, all good. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
No, that's great. Tell if you want to just very briefly tell our viewers and listeners what Host Planet is and how it came into being.
It's a media and educational platform for short-term rental hosts and property managers. We're all about helping hosts and property managers build the best businesses, the most sustainable businesses that they can. And we do that by sharing a lot of free education. So we have podcast episodes, ebook downloads, blog posts. We're very active on social media. We also have a newsletter. We have a quite fast-growing YouTube channel, a little bit like you guys. And also we're doing in-person events as well. So at the moment we are almost in the middle of a Host Planet roadshow across the UK. We've done 2 stops out of 7. Next stop in London, 23rd of April. So yeah, we're all about helping people. And it's, the goal really at the start of the business was to create lots of high quality content in order to build the audience, make it free, make it so good they can't believe it's free, build the audience, build the ecosystem. And we monetize the business through working with a lot of partners in the short-term rental space. So they advertise, they sponsor our podcast, our newsletter, they exhibit our events, that kind of thing. So yeah, we're proud to work with a lot of the biggest brands in the industry, like Sykes Holiday Cottages here in the UK, Guesty, Hostaway, Hospitable, Beyond, Price Labs. The list goes on. A lot of global businesses that we work with now.
Well, that's very, very impressive, and you've come a long way in a fairly short space of time as well. You founded in 2023?
Yeah, so founded straight after I finished working on the World Cup project. So directly before this, I spent 10 years living and working out in Qatar. So I was managing corporate communications for the local organising committee out there. So my team was responsible for press releases and website stories and video production, social media and all this kind of thing. And it was while I was in Qatar that I bought a holiday let in the UK. And I bought one really because I wanted to have a place to stay in the UK. I was coming back at one stage 3 or 4 times a year, and I was staying with family all the time. They definitely got sick of me coming along so often. I probably got sick of them a bit. So I thought, right, I need to have my own pad. And of course, I couldn't do that with a regular buy to let, kind of a normal investment property, if you like. So I thought, right, it's got to be a holiday let. And one thing that really convinced me to buy a holiday let was because I went to San Francisco about 10 years ago, couldn't find a hotel room for under $300 a night, and thought, I've heard of this thing called Airbnb, I'll give that a go. Ended up staying in a guy's kind of converted basement right round the corner from where they filmed Mrs. Doubtfire. Gorgeous part of town, near Golden Gate Park. And yeah, brilliant guest experience, way better than what a hotel experience would have been even at $300 a night. And I thought, right, maybe I should be doing something like this. And that's kind of what encouraged me to buy my first holiday let. And
I guess as a consequence of your experiences as a holiday let landlord, you've developed the knowledge and experiences that you now share from an education standpoint.
Yeah, it's a bit of that. But do you know what? For years I was interested in property investment, and I listened to the Property Hub podcast, which started in about 2013. Those guys were really early into podcasting and creating content. And the first property I actually bought was a buy-to-let, very much like inspired by them and all the methods that they teach on the podcast and all the free education that they share. And when I switched and ended up buying a holiday let, I noticed that holiday lets weren't really spoken about in the same way. There wasn't the wealth of information out there like there is for buy-to-let and other forms of property investment. And it just felt like a real golden opportunity. I thought, well, maybe I can build a version of Property Hub, but aimed at short-term rentals. Because, with holiday lets, on Property Hub, when they talk about holiday lets, they were often quite dismissive. They'd say, oh, it's too much time, it's too much effort, it's not passive investment. Whereas like my experience, I get quite annoyed when I'd hear this, and I was like, I kind of want to stick up for short-term rentals and holiday lets. So I thought, maybe I need to build it myself.
Well, it sounds like you had a reasonably good experience, which is why you've probably presumably why you developed sort of the passion for the short-term rental sector. When you went about, when you're buying these properties, being based in Qatar most of the time, let's be honest, with probably a very full-on job that was very demanding. How did you decide on the locations of the properties that you bought, and how did you go about dealing with the management of properties which are literally thousands of miles away from where you were based full time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, when I started, as I said, I wanted somewhere that I could go myself. And I wasn't overly concerned with a return on investment. It was a case of getting somewhere in the location that I wanted, fairly near my family, that kind of paid its way. So long as it kind of washed its face from an investment point of view, then I was in Qatar. I'm not interested in scaling to hundreds of properties or all that thing. It's like this is kind of it's something for me to use when I need to use it. And in the beginning, my mum was out of work at the time, and she lived down the road, and she'd help me manage. She'd go and see guests and sort out the cleaners and all that kind of thing. So it was a bit of a team effort. And at the start, like I say, the mortgage back then was really low. The costs weren't that high. Energy bills weren't that high. And I found pretty quickly that, this is actually making much more profit than I thought, even though at the start, because my knowledge really of short-term rentals wasn't as high as it should have been, I wasn't charging enough money and all the rest of it, but it was still making a good profit, and it was like, and I can use it whenever I want. So it was, in terms of picking the location, it was very personal to me. I picked somewhere that I wanted to be, simple as that. I mean, if I was starting out tomorrow, I'd approach it in a completely different way, because since being a manager myself, I've got a couple of holiday lets now, and since starting Host Planet, and I'm speaking to experts in the space all the time who really know what they're doing in terms of short-term rentals, it would be a lot different. You'd put a lot more research into it. And I think also the goalposts have shifted a bit. I guess 10, 15 years ago, I don't want to use the term easy money, but it was a lot easier than what it is now. There's regulation to consider, there's licensing in certain parts of the country, mortgage costs are a lot higher, energy costs are a lot higher. I think you need to do a lot more research in order to have a successful investment today than what you did 10 years ago.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. I mean, the margin for error when you bought it, I mean, it was, you were in a bit of you had a soft landing, I guess, when you bought it, and now it's a bit trickier. I suppose, would you say the availability of specialist finance for holiday lets is probably the one thing that is better than it was then? Like, how did you go about dealing with the financing of it? Was it just treated like a standard buy-to-let at the time?
So, I mean, there was a couple of things there. I mean, first of all, I think the availability of finance has increased over the last 10 years. I think a lot more lenders now have got involved in the space. Back then, I had a double whammy. It wasn't just a holiday let mortgage I needed. It was an expat holiday let mortgage I needed. So I ended up using a specialist broker who deals specifically in expat products, whether it's a residential buy-to-let or anything else. And while I was in Qatar, I actually used them for the 3 or 4 properties that I bought. So Yeah, I mean, definitely the availability's increased. I mean, obviously, you know, the industry's changed a lot. You know, it got me back when you were mentioning there, like when I bought my first rental, you know, what I did was probably what a lot of people did back then and still do to a certain extent. You get the property, however you get it, you either buy it or inherit it or whatever it is. You take the photos, you kit it out and you put it on Airbnb. And that's what I did. And, you know, now you need to think about a lot more things. There's a lot of different platforms that you need to be visible on. You need to be thinking about how you can develop direct bookings, for example. You know, what's your strategy there? So yeah, I think soft landing, as you suggested, was a good way to put it. It seemed a lot simpler. Looking back, it seems a lot simpler. It's not that long ago, but yeah, it seems simpler.
Yeah, I mean, as a consumer, I engage with the sort of short-term rental sector on a periodic basis. We typically will, like as a family, we'll go away in February. We call it the dog's holiday, so we'll normally do a staycation in the UK somewhere. So we've just come back from Derbyshire, and actually the host, they had really fantastic converted like barn. They're on farmland near Ashbourne, and then she gave us the contact details once we'd stayed, so that if we wanted to come back, we could book directly with them and all the rest of it. Because I guess the platforms they charge a good commission, and you know the hosts want to keep a bit more of that for themselves, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, like over recent years, I mean, what people used to do, what I used to do actually, you know, a guest would come from an OTA, online travel agency like Airbnb, Booking.com, Vrbo, wherever it might be. And then when they've left, you'll send them a note saying, hey, book direct next time, you'll save a little bit of money. Now Airbnb won't let you do that. They won't let you share a link to your direct booking website. And even I had a guest recently who was inquiring about staying, and she said, oh, would it be cheaper if we booked direct? And I know that Airbnb, I can't share a direct booking link. Airbnb will stop me. And instantly her message was flagged as suspicious. So Airbnb now are you know, they want to keep people
understandably
on the platform as much as possible. And, you know, they don't want, you know, somebody to book with them once and then they lose that customer forever.
Yeah, that's not an ideal situation. In fact, we've had it a few times actually where we've ended up with the details of the host that we were staying with. We had a great stay for a fortnight near Lisbon through Vrbo, but it was kind of bizarre, like because that one was there's a guy on the ground who's like so I guess for those people who aren't aware, you have the booking platforms like the Vrbos and Airbnbs, and then you've got you've then got people who do like host maker type people who basically they manage your Airbnb portfolios for you.
It might be the owner, it might be a host, might be a co-host, might be a property management company.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this guy managed it. It's sort of, I call it like the Wentworth of Lisbon, and we were staying in a sort of, trust me, we weren't staying in one of the fancy places, but it was amazing location. And when we said, look, I've still got his details somewhere, and I can reach out to him. But he's like, next time, just get in touch with me directly. But crucially, that was because we met him physically in person, not through the chat on the Vrbo website.
And I think that really helps. You know, we're in this era now of AI, and every guest message is organised by your AI in some respects, depending on what property management software you're using. But I think if you can meet your guests, or if your co-host can meet the guests or the property management company, putting a face to the business is so important. I mean, you hear a lot of like direct booking website companies, they create these platforms. You know, they always say, put a photo of yourself, put a photo of the owners, humanize this, send a video of yourself, a selfie video, you know, to your guests when they arrive, because I think it makes such a massive difference. I mean, like in terms of direct bookings, another thing that I do, you know, when people arrive, we've got posters. We've got a poster on the fridge, we've got a poster somewhere else, and it's, you know, here's a QR code, book direct next time. You know, thanks for helping a small family business, thanks for helping our local economy. If you want to save a little bit more, here's where you go. So trying to turn that OTA booker into a direct booker next time, it's a big deal, because people, you know, ideally they don't want to pay the 18%, 15%, 20% commission, whatever it is.
You as the consumer benefit. probably because you can probably get a little bit of a saving over what you were paying, and then your host makes a little bit more money as well. So
yeah, exactly. It makes it a little bit more sustainable, but that's not to do down the OTAs. They do a phenomenal job of, like, you know, I mean, 15, 20 years ago, if you had a holiday let property, you had to work with an agency. You were literally, your property would have been photographed. I mean, I speak to people who've been in the industry a long time. They used to, it wasn't photographs in the book, it was drawings of a property. People would literally draw them, put them in the booklet, and then they get sent by a direct mail, and that's how people were booking their rentals. I mean, now the OTAs have democratized the industry like you wouldn't imagine, and it's probably why we're having this chat now, and I've set up the business. It wouldn't have happened without the amazing growth that we've had through Airbnb and other platforms.
Yeah, you know, and in fairness to them, you know, hats off to them. They have done amazing things, really. Yeah, and I guess they've also forced the broader hospitality trade, like the hotel space, has had to up its game as a consequence, right? Because, you know, if why would you spend, like in the case that you gave when you went to San Francisco, why would you spend $300 a night when you can, for a fraction of that cost, you could stay in as good of a location and with a personalised service? Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I think the cost was just over half, so it was about $180 a night. It was in a beautiful basement which had been converted. The host met us there. He gave us a printout of all the like recommended places where to go. He's there kind of like a concierge saying, look, if you need anything, if you need any recommendations, let me know. And I think he was like kind of like the ideal Airbnb host in the city where Airbnb was founded. I mean, if they wanted an ambassador, he was it. And, you know, from me, you know, my thinking, it's like, wow, this is the way to do it. This is what people want. And I think as well, you know, the reason why I think short-term rentals have grown so exponentially, or one of the reasons, is because they are a lot more convenient. They're so much better for families. I've got 3 kids. Do I want to stay in a hotel room with 3 kids? Not really. Would I prefer to stay in a short-term rental where they've got their own bedrooms and all the rest of it? So they're convenient. People like them. Often they're cheaper than hotels.
And you can still get hotel-like services, can't you? Because you can, I think you can get you know, if you want a massage, you can get people come for a massage. You want a chef, they can arrange for a private chef. So it's not like you know, it's not like a out and out. If you want, you can still have a hotel-like experience, because you can still have a chef or whatever, or have people come and cook for you. You know, you don't have to be fully self-catered.
Very much so. And I think both. I think hotels are learning from short-term rentals, and short-term rentals are learning from hotels. And we see that now in, you know, apart hotels. We did our first event of the roadshow down in Cornwall at the start of February, and one of the companies who was involved actually runs an apart hotel. It's where we stayed. Beautiful place. You know, the kind of the convenience of a short-term rental, but all the extras that you expect from a hotel. So there's a beautiful cafe there, there's an Italian restaurant, there's a paddle court, there's gym, there's swimming pool, everything you kind of need. And it's this blended version of hospitality, which is, I think it's great, isn't it, that both kind of asset classes, I suppose, or both different types of hospitality learn from each other. And you mentioned they're like the upselling kind of thing. You know, if you want to hire a private chef to come into your short-term rental, you can do that. And a lot of hosts and property managers around the world are getting really savvy now when it comes to upsells and what they can offer. I spoke to one company in the US which specializes in helping hosts and property managers present upsells to their guests. So it's like, you know, it's a curated digital guidebook, and here's the content that you need to share and the links. And in one location in the US, there's, you know, a property. Everybody wants to go there because it's got a brilliant fireplace. So their biggest upsell is firewood. It costs them like $3 for a pack of firewood. They sell it for $30, and every guest wants this thing. I mean, over time, that really, really adds up. So, but you know, you look at the hotel. You know, a hotel wants to keep you in the hotel because they know the longer you stay, the more money you spend.
Correct.
With a short-term rental, your business is part of the local ecosystem. So we're encouraging you to go to the shops, the restaurants, the cafes, the local businesses. We're encouraging you to do that. But at the same time, what can we learn? What are the services and things that we can offer to guests and to make sure they have an amazing experience and also increase the revenue a bit?
Do you ever have hosts who have kind of like get referral fees from the local pub or the local, you know, the local restaurant or the local fill in the blank.
Yeah, I think there's two ways of doing it. Yeah, I mean, you can get the referral fees. Like, for example, I mean, you mentioned private chefs before. So there's a company called Y Hungry that we've done a lot of work with. They're based in London. Y Combinator startup, they do the private chefs. And if you put their link in your digital guidebook, you give it to your guests and they book, you're going to get a commission for that.
Nice.
And in some ways, like one thing I do is I contact the local businesses near me and say, look, we want to encourage, we already do encourage people to come to your business. If they come to the business and they're from us, will you give them a discount? So I don't ask for a commission or anything like that. I want to kind of enhance the guest experience. So if we can put something in the guidebook saying, oh, look, the Indian restaurant's down the road, it's really good, go there, tell them you're staying at our place, they'll give you 10% off or whatever it is, then I think you can use it as enhance the guest experience, or you can use it as to try and get extra revenue as well. Yeah.
We'll try and get a combination of the two. And I suppose it's not actually the first question I wanted to ask was, are you seeing an increase in the number of buy-to-let landlords due to the upcoming changes due to the Renters Reform Act, looking at the short-term sector as an alternative to traditional buy-to-lets, as a way, one, obviously to potentially get more revenue, but secondly, to be less exposed to the hassle or the potential risk that comes along with, tenants that you can't evict?
Yeah, I mean, people have. I don't think it's this mass move that maybe has been suggested in some parts of the media. There's no doubt that people have looked at it. I think going back 10 years, I think it was much more attractive to look at the difference between buy-to-let and short-term rentals, purely based on the numbers. I mean, if I ran the numbers on the first investment I had, with a long-term rental back then, it might have been worth 700 quid a month, 800 quid a month maybe. But with a short-term rental in peak season, it'd be 2,500 quid in revenue. But there's a lot more expenses. There's a lot more money going out. And it's a lot harder. Property management is tough. It's really, really difficult. Short-term rentals, it is hard work.
Because those properties, because I imagine the properties need a lot of maintenance, because they get, people with suitcases traipsing in and out. You're going to have scratches on walls, and not everyone takes as much care of the properties when they're staying them as others do, right?
Exactly. Look, I mean, I've got 2 properties, and I call a plumber and a handy person and an electrician way more than I ever expected I would. It seems like not a month goes by without something happens, something got to pay for. And so kitting it out costs a lot of money compared to a buy-to-let, and then, like you rightly say, maintaining it's a lot of work, and then throw in dealing with guests, etc. I mean, you can be hands off. You can hand over to a property management company. They're probably going to take 15, 18, 20% plus VAT in a lot of cases. So that's obviously going to really affect your bottom line. I think a lot of it depends kind of where you are, mortgage point of view. If you don't have a mortgage, hand it over to a property management company, you'll still do all right. Yeah. If you've got a mortgage, tricky. The margins are going to be thin.
Yeah, you got to be careful. And I suppose you've also got you do have some interesting stories about how people use the short-term rentals. I think last year or the year before last, I saw on someone's, either it was on their story or on their Instagram carousel that I follow, and shall we just say that some adult paraphernalia had been left at the property, and it was suggested that perhaps it was used for some filmmaking.
These things do happen from time to time. Yeah, we actually hosted a dinner with Y Hungry, actually, who I mentioned before, and we invited a lot of property managers from across the country. We had about 30 or 40 people at this dinner, and we asked them to share some of their horror stories. And oh my gosh, we had somewhere a short-term rental had been turned into a brothel, and it had been involved in some kind of like turf war, and a guy from an opposite crew, I imagine, had turned up and basically like spray painted in red around the whole property, and it was just an unmitigated nightmare. That you get the paraphernalia and things left behind that you'd rather not be clearing up, and cleaners sending you photos and be like, what's this?
Yeah, and they're charging you extra to have hazmat suits there.
Yeah, and there was another one that was funny, and it was a property, and they had really nice gardens by the sound of it. I think it was quite a big property, and they had some guests over from China, and in the back garden they had some ducks. They must have had I think they had a duck pond or something. And the property manager came back, at the end to check that everything had been all right. Noticed the ducks were missing. The guests had thought that they were part of basically the welcome basket and had cooked them. So yeah, there's all sorts of things happening in short-term rentals.
I don't know why I think it's just so embarrassingly terrible that I can't help but laugh, and it's just crazy. Yeah. I can't believe it.
I'll take the duck story over the turf war one any day. Any day.
Poor
sorry to the RSPB, but yeah.
Poor ducks. Yeah. Oh dear. Oh well, that's we'll have to segue on from that. But in terms of the short-term rental sector, are there any operators that are kind of doing it at scale and almost sort of trying to build their own kind of brand? Is that a thing, or do you see that as becoming more of a thing as time goes on?
Massively. I mean, this has been going on a while. The event that we did down in Cornwall, great example of a brilliant brand called Beach Retreats. They scaled to about 240 rentals that they were managing. They were just bought out last year by Travel Chapter. So you've got Sykes, who have got about 35,000 rentals in total. Travel Chapter after that, I think 15, 20,000.
Is that managed, or they own the bricks and
managed?
Mortar?
Managed. Yeah. So all those companies that I mentioned, they're managing properties. Yeah. They might have a couple that they own here and there, but most of them it's managed. And Beach Retreats, they managed to get to about 97% direct booking rate, which is huge. And they hardly have to use Airbnb Booking.com because they've got such a loyalty to their brand. And how they've done it, like their marketing, the way they present themselves on Instagram and social media, you will never see them posting, hey, last minute deal, 30% off, something like that. Never. The way that they present their brand is always focusing on the experience. This is what it's like to be on a Cornish beach. You could be surfing right now. You could be eating this amazing food. You could be in this spot. That's their focus, like 100% of the time, and it never ever wavers. And they've just managed to build a brilliant brand in this way, and through lots of different ways, obviously focusing on SEO and Google ads and content and blogs and all the rest of it. There's no kind of like magic pill to make everything perfect. You get to 97% direct bookings. It's all these things built into one. And they're a great example of a brand that has developed themselves, built themselves to the point where they've got this massive loyalty. Another way they've done it as well is through the properties that they take on. They're very, very selective. It has to be an Instagrammable property. It has to be within walking distance of the beach. It has to be something that their customers, who they know really, really well, are going to book. And they're like, there's no point us taking on properties which we know are substandard. We have to take on properties which reflect our brand. And a lot of people who apply to be part of, here, I've got this property, Beach Retreats, will you take it on? I think they reject more than half of the people who approach them. So it's not this scale and try to get to as many properties. It's like, we know our brand, we know our wheelhouse, this is how we operate. And a lot of that, some of those owners, they take the advice on board from Beach Retreats, they make the changes that they want, and then a year later they come back and say, look, we've done everything. They're like, okay, your property's now at a level where we know we can market it, so they'll take them. But I think they're a brilliant example of a property management brand that have made their brand exceptional. Yeah, no,
that's fascinating to hear about. Logic would dictate that it's much easier to scale without the freeholder. I wonder if there are people who who are trying to do it at the actual asset level at scale as well.
I think probably what we're seeing in that space would be maybe more like apart hotels.
Right.
It would be the bigger developments. I think, picking up individual properties here and there and trying to scale, by owning everything would be tricky. There will be a few, I think, but they'd be smaller in terms of like the numbers that they have. But on the apart hotel space, you're seeing some brilliant brands spring up here and there. Sea Space, the one I mentioned earlier that we saw in Cornwall, fantastic. What they've built, the facilities they offer, and also what I noticed when I was there is that brand is not just appealing to guests who come and visit Cornwall, but it's appealing to the local community as well. Because everybody who was there in the cafe, the restaurant, when I turned up, they're all local. It's like mums with kids and grandmas come along and all the rest of it. So it's become part of the community as well.
Yeah, because I guess, Cornwall is a prime example of a location where the holiday lets or the holiday rentals, that they, in many ways, taking those properties out of the local housing stock has put a lot of Cornish people in a position where, that the house prices have become massively inflated, and so, they almost become quasi second class citizens in certain locations at certain times. So presumably in some holiday locations, there is inevitably, I say is there, but I think I already know the answer to the question, but how much tension do you tend to see or be aware of in these holiday locations between local communities and the holiday rental sector?
There is tension, no doubt about that, and I think it depends on the location and what's going on in local ecosystems. But I think probably a good example of this, I read an article, I think it was in the Sunday Times, maybe a year or so ago, and a lady I think she was in Cornwall actually, and she was working as a cleaner, and her job was to clean short-term rentals and businesses in the hospitality industry, and then she was also the lead campaigner against holiday lets. So it's like, okay, decide what do you want to get rid of holiday lets or do you want to keep your job? And what I've seen a lot recently on the East Coast, I know like the Filey and Scarborough area quite well, and a lot of people up there, there's this the extra tax on second homes, and there's a big difference between a second home which somebody is hardly using and a holiday let, which is a massive net positive to the local community. And you've got all the businesses there, all the pubs, the restaurants, the cafes, everything that relies on tourism saying we need the holiday lets, we need the hospitality accommodation. If this isn't here and the influx of people isn't coming in all the time, then this place is finished. So that, of course, there has to be a balance, but a sledgehammer approach to get rid of holiday lets, I think, would be an absolute disaster for many of these rural and coastal communities that frankly rely on the tourism industry. And what we need to do better as a short-term rental industry is to shout loudly and proudly about the benefits that we bring to these, especially coastal and rural areas. A lot of them are not the most salubrious parts of the country. They're not all like Cornwall. They're parts of the country that have been struggling for a long time economically, and without holiday lets, it would only get a lot worse. So as an industry, we need to talk about the economic benefits that we bring to the local pub, to the cafes, the restaurants, the sweet stalls, whatever it is. We've got to get on the front foot, because if we don't talk about all the benefits that we bring to the country, to local economies everywhere, nobody else is. Nobody's knocking on the door from the BBC or national newspapers saying, "Hey, I want to talk about how great holiday lets are." That's not happening. So we've got to talk about it ourselves, and that's part of the reason for Host Planet, frankly, and having a roadshow and going out there and building this community, because we are very, very disparate. We're not like a hotel lobby. We've, the vast majority of people in the industry have got one or two properties, like me.
Is there a short-term rental trade body at the moment that that you can kind of coalesce around, or do you think that's something that you're hoping to be more at the forefront and the vanguard of to create that representation for the broader industry?
So we do have representation. So we've got the Short-Term Accommodation Association based here in London. They're actually strategic partners for our roadshow. We've got PASC as well, which is the Professional Association of Self-Caterers. Up in Scotland, they have the ASSC, Association of Scottish Self-Caterers, if I've got that correct. So yeah, it's growing, but I think it needs more. They need to be seen more, and people who are in the industry operating holiday let owners, property managements, they need to understand that these bodies exist, first of all, how they can help, what we can all do collectively, whether it's writing to MPs. We saw recently there was a suggestion that holiday lets would be part of EPC mandatory requirements, saying that all holiday lets would have to be an EPCC. That would have been an absolute disaster, frankly, for a lot of holiday let properties, especially some of them which are very old. And
definitely.
Initially, the government was saying, well, you'll have to be part of EPCC, and if you're not EPCC rated, you're going to have to spend at least £15,000 to try and boost your energy efficiency. Once you've spent the £15,000, if you're still not energy efficiency C, okay, we'll let you go, but you've got to spend that 15 grand. Now, the prospect of that for a lot of owners in the industry, especially, and as I've said, most of them are one or two properties, would have been disastrous. That might have been 2 or 3 years profit for some. As I said, it's a marginal, can be a marginal industry, this one. But the PASC and the STAA, ASSE did some great work, lobbied the government, explained, used data to back up what they were saying about how it would affect the industry, did surveys with all their members, and then the government eventually came back and said, okay, we're going to exempt you from this, you don't have to have the EPCC. And that was a big win in a time of when we're getting faced with a lot of different regulation and licensing in Scotland and all the things going on. So it shows the power of collectively working together.
This episode was sponsored by Avamore Capital. Ground up development, refurbishment, part completed projects, fast bridging. Avamore Capital backs you through every stage. Direct access to experts who understand your timeline and pressures. Fast decisions, clear communication, no shuffling between departments or re-explaining your deal. From foundations to exit, Avamore delivers the expertise and funding solutions to keep projects moving. Visit avamorecapital.com. I know we were going to touch on regulation in the space. Can you just provide you just touched on Scotland in particular. Could you just give some examples of the regulation and the regulation and the licensing? I think there's some regulation around Airbnb or short-term rentals in London, for example, but maybe some people, some of our audience, who many of whom will be specialist finance brokers as well, maybe they may be unaware of some of the schemes or regimes that have been put in place. So
there's various different schemes. Definitely won't have time to run through all of them. Nice. I don't know all of them. But in London, you have a 90-day limit for short-term rentals, unless you have a special exemption to run as a short-term rental all year round. Does everybody adhere to that 90-day limit? I'm not sure, doubtful. Because I don't think it's policed. I don't think it's enforced. Right? I don't think there's anywhere near the number of people who would. I mean, goodness me, the amount of people you'd need to employ to enforce that rule. I have no idea what it would be. So there's a 90-day limit in London. Wales has something different. So we used to have the furnished holiday let tax regime. We don't have that anymore, but we still have the number of mandatory nights that you have to meet to be registered as a holiday let. And the advantage of being registered as a furnished holiday let is that you can have business rates instead of council tax. Right. And often if you have one property, you'll pay nothing in business rates. Otherwise, you would have been paying a couple of £100 a month in council tax, depending on where you are. So I think it's about, you have to be available for about 104 days and actually let for 70 days. That's in England. But in Wales, it's different. You have to be, I think it's let for 182 days, which is 6 months, full months of let, which is
a lot.
Which is very, very hard for people to meet. So we've had situations in Wales where, and the issue here is that a lot of places in Wales, they've implemented now double, triple council tax. So if you slip from business rates to council tax, you might find that your council tax bill is actually like £7,000, £8,000. Yeah. So if you go under the 182 days, it can basically put you out of business. So I think, there've been a lot of stories of operators in Wales who have just found it impossible to reach the 182 and have had to give up their businesses, or they've mental health crisis and all the rest of it. Licensing system in Scotland. Scotland has been terrible for a lot of the operators in Scotland, but probably good for the rest of the UK, because everybody else has looked at what Scotland has done and been like, oh my God, that's a total disaster. We don't want to do that. So they've had a licensing system there, which allegedly was brought in for health and safety, but now we're in a situation where a lot of things have gone underground, so they obviously need lots of accommodation during the Edinburgh Festival, and now all the listings that would have been available properly, or some of them, people are going on Facebook groups and saying, oh, I've got a place and come here, so it's kind of made it a bit of a black market. And I mean, Fiona Campbell at the ASSC has done some amazing work in lobbying up there, and hopefully things will change. But yeah, it's been very difficult for a lot of Scottish operators.
I had have a friend, someone actually I've done a little bit of business with. He's a technology founder, and he had a rental portfolio in Edinburgh. He's a Scottish guy, obviously, and he had quite a good setup. So I think he'd rent for 44 weeks a year to students. So basically student lets for 44 weeks, and then around the time of the Fringe, they'd rent it out to the Fringe. So he kind of getting two bites of the cherry. And I guess for someone like him, that angle that he'd carved out for himself was no longer available to him, because the cost and hassle of the licensing would massively outweigh the benefits of doing doing those lettings for the Fringe.
Yeah, and the winners generally, when we've seen licensing and regulation, which we've seen in Edinburgh and also we've seen it in New York, the winners have been the hotels, and the losers have been people operating short-term rentals, but also the consumers.
Yeah.
So suddenly now, if people go to New York or Edinburgh, the price of a hotel has gone up 20, 30, 40, 50% since this regulation has come in for short-term rentals, because the competition isn't there, so the hotels can whack their prices up, and of course, people, it's the consumer that loses out, I think, at the end of the day. As I've said previously, the part of the reason for the growth of short-term rentals is because people want to stay in a short-term rental. It's as simple as that. And I think we need to find a way to work with government a bit better and make sure that government and lawmakers, they really understand the value of short-term rentals and the value that we're bringing to local economies, because I think a lot of things get mixed up. I know that PASC and STAA regularly say they'll speak to politicians and they just don't really have a clue. They think a second home is a holiday let, and there's a massive difference between a second home and a holiday let.
Obviously on your road shows, aside from what we've already discussed, what are the other hot button topics that people are talking to you about, in the sector, both from a manager's perspective and also from an owner's perspective? What are the other things that, or what's coming down the track that people are introducing, or they can, both opportunity wise and also threat wise?
Definitely regulation's a big one. People want to hear about data as well, but AI is what's changing everything. That's what everybody's fascinated about, really, in terms of how it's going to change property management, how it's going to change the guest experience, how it's going to change all our lives. So I think, that's a huge focus.
Is that, from a manager's perspective, presumably that's a threat? From a host's perspective, is it less threat, more of an opportunity, or a bit of both?
I think it's a huge opportunity, probably, in the tech space, because at the moment we have so many property management software companies. There are so many tools. We talk in the industry a lot about property managers having a tech stack, because they'll have a property management system. They'll use some kind of dynamic pricing software. They might have a guest messaging system, a cleaning task management system. The list can go on and on. They might have kind of Airbnb listing optimization tools that they're using. Some people can have 10, 11, 12 bits of tech that they're kind of bolting onto their business here and there. And I guess with AI and Agentic AI, where are we going to get in terms of property management? It seems quite fascinating. I had a couple of guys contacted me a few weeks ago. They wanted to have a call, and they're building a property management software, which is... the idea being that you as a property manager will develop exactly what you want from that software. So you'll have kind of an AI agent, I guess like a Claude co-work or whatever it might be, and you will dictate exactly what you want. I need this kind of revenue management. I need this system. I need this cleaning automation, da-di-da-di-da. And in the same way that now, like I'm not a very techie person at all, but I can use a platform to develop an app is something I did a few months ago. And it's me just prompting it and telling it what I need. I think the exciting thing for a lot of property managers is having some kind of agentic AI where they can prompt exactly what they need from their property management system, exactly what they need from revenue management. Hey, I know we've got this big event coming up. What should our minimum stay strategies be? What should our prices be? What's our competition doing? Da-di-da-di-da-di-da. Rather than having to employ a revenue management specialist to do all this for you, can you have a conversation and basically get it done yourself? So I think that's very exciting about the industry.
And so the software you vibe coded yourself. What platform did you develop that in?
Oh, good question. Do you want me to tell you?
Well, because I have a bit of form building vibe coding apps
the
myself.
The app is onspace.ai.
Onspace, okay.
Onspace,
that's cool.
So I wanted to create an app. My challenge has been getting it onto the App Store. Getting the right login for Apple has been an absolute nightmare. But actually creating the app, I mean, it's pretty simple. But I wanted to create something for the roadshow. So like shows all the roadshow stops. You go into it, you can see all the speakers, the sponsors. There's the agenda for the day. Here's where you find out more about Host Planet. Very, very simple. But the fact that I could do it, I've never written a line of code in my life. If you showed me some code, I wouldn't have a clue. Like I said, I'm not a techie person, but I've managed to create an app which has been uploaded to the App Store. That for me is remarkable. If you'd have told me that a few years ago, I can actually create an app, that's ridiculous, but that's where we are. I think on the tech side, the speed of change and the democratization of it has been unreal. And I think the scary part is the speed. It is actually the speed and the speed of it all. At Avamore, both Zahir and I, we learned the basics of coding. So we learned that, Zahir probably got a bit deeper into Python than I did. But I did a course called the Replit 100 Days of Code. Replit is what's called an IDE. If for those that don't know what that is, basically it's where you can go and design and build apps. So I did their course, and that taught me a bit of Python. It taught me HTML, some CSS, a bit of Java. And then, but I got lazy. I got lazy about halfway through, and ChatGPT had just kind of started to come out of the woodwork. So I started to the daily exercises. I was using ChatGPT to basically cheat my way to doing it. But to be honest with you, like the more I thought about it, I was like, I don't really need to be able to do this myself. But back then, Replit didn't have its own in-house agent or the agent that you could use. But subsequently, it's got an agent that will effectively, you just use natural language and it will build it for you. And, in the past, I'd have a look at all the background files. I don't have to look at the background like Python or Python files or the HTML files. So it's really remarkable. And we as a family, we've got some commercial properties, mainly offices. And so one of them is a business park in Surrey. And we've been struggling to get tenants. And we particularly want to get like health and wellness tenants, so like therapists, counsellors, yoga studios, Pilates, physios, all that kind of stuff. Because we've got one of the buildings in the row of there's 8 units in total. One of the buildings is absolutely perfect for that. It's at the end, it's tucked away, and it's discreet. So if you've got a kind of quasi medical use, it's what you want. It's leafy, it's accessible. Our agents had no idea how to attract these tenants. Had no idea. I mean, for starters, commercial agents are
outside of central London or outside of the investment space, they're not the most proactive people in the world. They are adjusting to the 21st century reality of most occupiers looking for properties themselves directly and not being represented by an agent, which was always the case before. Landlord's agent goes down the pub with tenant's agent, and they look at I've got these guys, I've got this space, right, who fits who, perfect. That doesn't exist anymore. And so we built a lead generation tool. So we've uncovered, in a 10-mile radius, we've uncovered 1,200 companies with websites with real live email addresses. And we started marketing to that last week, and we've already had the first couple of bites from potential tenants. So it's a real validation of that. But I'm only able to do that because for the sake of spending, I don't know, a couple of £100 in Replit agent fees and, a couple £100 in Google Places API search calls, I could not have done that 3 or 4 years ago. That would have been, I'd just be every month having a marketing meeting with my commercial agents going, any interest? No, market's dead. And that's nonsense. It's not true.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast on the way down, and Daniel Priestley was talking about a legal issue that he had, and spoke to some lawyers, and they said it's going to cost you $50,000 basically for us to do this research and to advise you and da-da-da-da and all the rest of it. And he heard that figure and was just like, So then he started having a conversation with Claude Co-work, and basically did all the advice and everything that he needed via Claude. They literally researched everything, told him what to say, what to not say. This is what to say in a negotiation, da-da-da-da-da-da. And that cost $20 a month.
Yeah.
So, yeah, watch out, lawyers. I guess is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, democratizing, massively, to the point where, now you did that Replete course, which completely the right thing to do at the time, but now it's probably worthless because you can just go and with a normal language say exactly what you want. And I guess that's the pace of change is just absolutely remarkable.
Well, if I think about the technology we're building within Avamore, and I think it's making us much more efficient. It's making us much more predictable, which means that from a customer perspective, that's going to be great. However, I think any technology that we develop and build, even for a sector as specialist as development finance, because obviously like regulated residential mortgages and even buy-to-let, simple buy-to-let, that's already very automatable and very repeatable. For what we do is obviously a lot more heterogeneous. But even that, anything that we build 3, 4, 5 years from now, it's going to, the AI is developing at such a fast pace that actually the things that will matter is this kind of thing, right? It's our branding and the people that we have on the ground going out and building relationships, right? So,
it's all about relationships and building an ecosystem. It goes a little bit back to Host Planet, which I was saying at the start. The goal was to build an ecosystem to the point where we can organize events and fill a room with 120, 150 people. It's sharing content, but it's also that connection, which is going in many ways because people are becoming a bit more insular and are just having conversations with their AIs all the time. But I think, like I said before, there's two strands here, like with hosting short-term rentals. If you can actually meet the guest kind of, I don't know, they elevate the experience because it's like, oh, that doesn't usually happen. We don't usually have a conversation with the host or the owner. Oh, wow, they really care. And I think it's the same thing with that human connection. If you can organize events, I feel like now when we organize an event, people enjoy it a lot more. And I just feel like because it's just not happening as much.
No.
Because the whole world's happening online. So I think if you can build that niche and build a brand and be a brand where, people are finding what you do useful and helpful and free in our case. And then it's like, well, okay, well, I trust that brand, and that's something that I want to invest in, I want to be a part of, and I'm going to go to those events, and I'm going to trust those partners that they work with because of all the help that they've given me. I think it's human nature, isn't it? If it's paying things forward all the time.
Yeah.
And I was speaking to somebody else in the industry who's a consultant, and he's very, very visible. He goes to every event, he talks to everybody, he goes on stage, he doesn't ask for any money. He's just there, he's visible, and he's helpful all the time. And he's not asking for money, he's not asking for a fee to give his advice or anything like that. He'll give it for free. He enjoys doing it because he knows in 5, 6, 7 years time, when that person maybe wants to sell his company or whatever, he'll come to him for a consultant. And it's human nature, isn't it? If you've helped somebody, or if somebody's helped you want to pay them back eventually.
I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with Gary Vaynerchuk, but he had a book, jab, 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 right hook, right? And obviously the jab means give, and then the right hook is the take, right? So it's just that ratio of giving to taking. And if invariably, as the example you gave, is the person who's giving a lot all the time, eventually when they do ask, and as you say, they're more likely to be asked than have to ask. But when they do ask, they'll get they'll get paid back quick, they'll get paid back in spades. So
exactly, yeah. And and going back to the ecosystem thing as well now, creating content, giving stuff away, but now we're getting to this point where everybody wants to be cited by large language models. Everybody wants, like property management companies, a really good example, or property management software. If somebody goes to Gemini or Perplexity or ChatGPT or whatever and says, what's the best property management software? They want their company to come up first. But how do you do that? We've gone to this level now where you have to be trusted, so you have to be visible everywhere, and probably a lot more simpler than it, like the old SEO where you got to build your backlinks and all that kind of thing. You have to be visible, you have to be trustworthy, so you have to be cited by trusted platforms. You have to be on an educational platform like House Planet. You have to have been on YouTube videos. You have to have been on podcasts, because that's the first thing that all these LLMs are going to. They're going to these trusted resources. So like as a company, if you've got a huge web of content, and you're everywhere and you're visible and you're trusted and you've got all these backlinks and everything else, then you're gonna get ahead, and you're gonna be the people, the companies that are going to be recommended. And
it as part of Host Planet is one of the things you're educating, your I suppose your members, if for want of a better, your members or your fans, for want of a better expression. Are you encouraging and highlighting the importance of personal brand with all of this in mind? Like, is that quite a big aspect of it?
We talk a little bit, especially when we talk about direct bookings.
Yeah.
I think we talk about, how you can market yourself as a short-term rental. And, we try to make the content as accessible as possible. So whether you're just starting out, or maybe you've got your first property, or whether you've got hundreds and you're scaled to the max, we try to make it as relevant and accessible as possible. So it might be, if you're starting out, maybe how do you go after direct bookings? How do you build your personal brand, your business brand? How do you become the go-to person? And it might be simple things like, building your Instagram. If you want direct bookings and your place is set up to host contractors during the week, go and contact contracting companies.
Yeah.
Build your brand that way. Be visible where your audience is. Like, Mark Simpson is a good friend of mine. He runs a company called Boostly. They create direct booking websites, and he does a lot of education about how you can get more direct bookings. One of his clients, she knew that the property she had was perfect for people that were contractors working for the council. She ended up sponsoring bins, because that's where all her audience were. They were collecting the bins. They were doing all this kind of stuff. So she put her property on there. She put stickers on all the bins and everything. She got loads of bookings, got loads of inquiries. So
that's not even that high tech, is it?
No, not high tech. You don't have to be high tech, do you? But be where your audience expects you to be, because and this is where this is how you can then build your brand and become that go-to for whatever you're doing. It doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be something that the AI is going to pick up. It can be very simple, but then eventually you will be the person when a contractor goes into ChatGPT and says, I need a two bedroom place in Middlesbrough for 3 weeks, which company do I use? They advertised on the bit, right, there you go, that company.
I'd be curious to see because if you just curious to see what the listings, the Airbnb listings would be like in Middlesbrough. So that's it's and the funny thing about the sticker example, right? I guess that's where by sharing these stories, you're adding a lot of value in that circumstance. Because if you were to go to a sort of run of the mill garden variety marketing consultant or SEO consultant, they're going to say to you, Google AdWords, pay-per-click, Facebook promotion, all that kind of stuff, try and test it. And ultimately, it's like just thinking about some of the stuff we've been doing internally as a business and around how we underwrite and execute deals. It's like, just go back to stop, don't midwit it. Go back to first principles, and what you're talking about is like be where your customers are. Those are the first principles. Don't try and get too meta and be like, right, okay, well, what are contractors like doing? I don't know. They're like beer or whatever. You're like, okay, well, just like advertising pint glasses. That's obviously not, or something stupid like that.
Yeah. I mean, go to where your customers are.
Yeah.
First thing, but like, if you're creating content, which obviously we do a lot, create the content that your audience wants to engage with. It's as simple as that. Always be completely relevant to your subject, to your niche, whatever it is. So, we get approached all the time by people who want to come on our podcast, and most of these emails that I get are definitely generated by AI, because usually they all start the same way, which was, your conversation with so and so really struck a chord. Da-di-da-di-da-da. Oh god. So we reject a lot of the people, because everything that we produce has to be relevant to short-term rental hosts and property managers. That's the whole shtick. If we're not doing stuff that's related to holiday let, short-term rentals, vacation rentals, serviced accommodation, whatever you want to call it, then it's just not relevant to our audience. So I think you have to really respect your audience and not necessarily always create the content that you think's hilarious or funny, because that's irrelevant. It's like when I started out on the newspapers, you might write a story and I don't know, maybe somebody you interview says something that's funny or whatever, and you end up putting it in as a quote, and the news editor's like, why is that relevant to the story? It's not relevant to the story. Or like, your opinion's not relevant to the story. You have to always, respect the story, you have to respect the content, but above all, respect the audience, because if you're creating stuff that they're not interested in, then especially in today's attention economy, you're going to be swiped quicker than whatever swipes very quickly.
I mean, do you think your background in communications has given you that a real head start since setting up Host Planet? Because I guess you know how to tell a story and how to distribute that story as well.
I think that was probably my biggest advantage by far, because most of the content that I could see being created in the space was being created by short-term rental hosts and property managers. That was their business, and they'd then thought, well, I want to share my knowledge, I'm going to start a newsletter, I'm going to start a blog, I'm going to start a podcast. And what I could see from the content that they were creating was that they really knew about short-term rentals, but they didn't know much about creating content and creating media and creating stuff that's going to cut through. So I think I've said before that my media background was probably my biggest strength, and in some ways my biggest weakness, because am I short-term rentals guru? No. I had a couple of properties, and what I really, when I look back now, my knowledge of short-term rentals was zip. Next to nothing. I had a couple of properties, but I thought I knew a lot more than I did. And I think that was probably a little bit of a weird entrepreneurial superpower, where she's like, I think I know quite a lot. I can go and create this platform. Yeah. In reality, I knew nothing. I'm sure the Germans have got a really long word for this. Lots of like misplaced confidence in yourself. But looking back now, I probably needed that confidence to kind of actually go ahead and start the idea. But I mean, I knew nobody in short-term rental, literally nobody. Like, I had this idea, created a brand, created a PowerPoint presentation, and then spent the summer on LinkedIn. And I just messaged people incessantly, set up meetings, organised podcast recordings, and that's how it grew. But I believed in the idea because there just wasn't something there in the short-term rental industry. And I could see this, the STR industry is huge, right? There's so many properties, there's so many property managers. Airbnb's massive, but hosts and property managers and owners, it's such a hard audience to reach. How do you reach this audience? So I could see tech companies, they're paying an extortionate amount on Google AdWords. They're spending a lot on SEO. They're spending, thousands to try and acquire customers. So I'm thinking, well, if I can create a platform and the audience is hosts and property managers, that's a really valuable audience to reach. And if I go to these guys and say, well, why don't you stop spending 20 grand a month on Google ads and SEO? Why don't you give me a little bit of that and we'll create content together and reach the people that you want to reach? And I thought that to me seems like a good business idea. So that's kind of where it started.
And it sounds like it's proving to be the case.
It's doing all right.
Yeah. What's the future look like then? What do the next few years or the next 5 years look like for Host Planet now?
We want to be the go-to place for the short-term rentals industry. Whether you're a host, property manager, industry professional, this is where you go to find out what's new in tech. It's where you go to find out how to be a good host and property manager, how to deliver a great guest experience with all the educational resources that we're providing. I think definitely build on the roadshow. We're already planning a bigger and better 2027 roadshow. And I think a massive opportunity for us is the US. I mean, about 20% of our audience is in the US. A lot of our biggest sponsors and partners are based there. So there's a huge opportunity for us to do more events and get more ingrained in the vacation rentals market rather than the holiday let one. But we are very global at the moment. I mean, when I started the business, I thought it would be really very much focused on the UK, but quickly I realized that this is a really global place, and
absolutely,
and we can reach people everywhere. I mean, we've got subscribers and podcast listeners in more than 100 countries, so it would I think we've got to leverage that. So I think more events around the world, just and continue with that North Star of creating content which is relevant to hosts and property managers, which is going to help them continue to be helpful and useful.
Do you see sort of kind of VC or private equity investment to accelerate that, that international expansion? Is that something that you sort of see in the near future? Potentially.
I mean, I think there are a few routes. I mean, I think first of all, I feel like it's a bootstrapped company. I feel like there's still a way I can take it quite far on my own.
Yeah.
I think there's a few kind of examples. I mean, probably the reality for us would be that a tech company in the space who wants to leverage our audience fully might want to invest in us or buy us. And there have been examples of this. There was a guy who ran a blog which turned into a newsletter and a platform a little bit similar to Host Planet, but not as big and not as varied, and wasn't doing events. It didn't have a big YouTube channel or anything like that. It was mainly a blog and a newsletter. And that company has now been bought by Price Labs, which is a dynamic pricing software. And kind of they completely leverage that audience. So I think that's potentially a route for us. Yeah, I mean, I think possibly with some investment, we can become more valuable. I mean, I look at what Property Hub did a few years ago. They started an investment arm of the business. It's like, right, okay, if you're interested in buy to let, give us some money. I think it was like minimum you had to give like 5,000 quid or something like that. They had a fund for about 2 million quid, and it reached its max in about 48 hours. So I wonder if is it possible that we can do something like that, where we can invite our audience, if they're interested in investing in holiday lets and short-term rentals, can we do something similar to that? But I think, there's a few ways that we could go, but we'll see. But it's been exciting. It's a brilliant industry to be a part of. I think, after 10 years involved in the World Cup, which was a very corporate environment, especially with our friends at FIFA, to go from this, which is a very welcoming industry, and everybody wants to help each other. And the great thing is it's so new. Everybody's either a founder or they were a founder very, very recently. If you've been in the industry for more than about 5 years, you're an absolute veteran in short-term rentals. So everybody's kind of at that stage where we want to drive the industry forward and help one another and chat and see how far we can take stuff. So it's a great industry to be a part of, and I'm proud of where we've got to so far. But yeah, lots more to do.
Brilliant. Well, look, we're sort of running out of time, so we're just going to wrap up shortly. But before we go, closing tradition is to ask our guests if they had some self-talk for their younger selves, what would they say to them and why? So what would you say to yourself, your younger self, and why?
Probably slow down. I think at the start of my career, I was fast to move jobs. I'm going to shape this differently. Slow down, but ask for help. Because when I started my first job in newspapers, what I was really bad at was asking for help. And there were people around me that could have helped me. And I arrived in my first newspaper job and I was 20, was I? 20. And kind of arrived there, and I'd been at journalism college and I'd done the NCTJ and everything like that, and kind of turned up thinking that I had to appear to be the finished article. And of course I'm not. It's my first job working for a newspaper. And I had I managed to get a front page story in my first week. It was a weekly newspaper and all this kind of things. I got off to a great start, and then everything kind of like plateaued and went a bit downhill. And I wasn't writing well enough, and the news editor had kind of tut when anything I sent came through. And what I needed to do really was to talk to people and shadow them, and get a mentor really. So I think my advice to my younger self would be, see who's doing it really well in the newsroom, and go out for coffee with that person and go along to jobs with them and ask them how they've kind of got to that position. Because I think so many young people are maybe afraid of doing that. I was probably afraid of doing that. I might have thought that was a sign of weakness at the start of my career by kind of asking for help, which is ridiculous. But yeah, nobody's the finished article at anything. So, and definitely not now, even 20 odd years later. So, slow down and ask for help.
Well, amazing advice. I completely agree with all of that. I won't share any anecdotes alongside that, because I think that would only steal your thunder. But I don't want to steal any thunder. But because that was, I think, perfect advice, and certainly has similarities to some of the things I'd say to myself. So brilliant. Final thing is but to say thank you for coming in. Inevitably there will be plenty of people who want to reach out. What's the best way of getting in touch? Presumably through one of the various social media channels, but perhaps if you want to just share what your preferred method of contact is. You're
very welcome to contact me on any of the Host Planet channels or on LinkedIn, or you can email me, james@hostplanet.club.
Brilliant. I've been your host, Michael Dean. You can find me on the internet at property_funder. Many thanks, as always, to Avamore Capital for their continued support for the podcast. And thanks to both Davina and Versta for both being producers and editors beyond compare. And we'll talk to you again on the next one. Thank you, and bye-bye.